me welcome you all on behalf of ASCI. My name is Flavio Macau. I am the ASCI WA Chapter President. And today we will have another webinar from our series where we'll talk about impacts of cyber attacks on supply chain. Before we go to the webinar, just a reminder that if you're not a member to ASCI, anytime, please Google it and connect and learn more about what we can do for you and how you can participate and integrate in our activities in Chapter WA, especially if you are interested in our registration pathway to become a registered associate, to ASCI, or a registered practitioner or registered professional. And we have a lot of information on our website. If you work with procurement, operations, logistics, information systems, all connected to supply chain logistics, you're more than welcome to join ASCI and contribute and reap the benefits as well of your membership. So act now and come to our website and learn more about how you can promote your work experience and how we can work together. And I'd like to introduce you to Darren Michael, and Darren is Director Owner of Evidence Advisory, Western Australian Digital Forensic and Incident Response Services Company. He has plenty of experience in Australia and overseas, working with the Australian Federal Police as a trained investigator, working for the United Nations Weapons as an inspector operating in Iraq, which is quite interesting and amazing. And I'll leave you with Darren to talk about himself and to talk about the impacts of cyber attacks on supply chain. So Darren, it's up to you.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I will just share my screen now. If I can find it, where is it? Let's share the appropriate screen. There we go. Okay, that should now be presenting, I hope. Excellent. All right, yeah, thanks very much for that. So yeah, today's webinar is about impacts of cyber attacks to supply chain. A little bit about myself and the other Director of Evidence Advisory, Phil Russo. So I'm an original nerd. I built my first computer game when I was 12 and my first computer when I was 16. And I mean that quite literally. When I built my computer at 16, you couldn't buy a keyboard. I had to make my own. Quite an original nerd. Done lots of interesting things. I was involved in the setting up of the computer forensic area at the Federal Police back in the early 90s. So the Federal Police, as most people would know, is all about guns, drugs, and money. So I spent a number of years as an investigator there. Phil is ex-West Australian Police, has a lot of experience. He also was involved in setting up when they set up the computer crime or computer forensic area of the West Australian Police. Has a lot of experience globally in training. So he does a lot of training of law enforcement and other people in using the tools that we use to do what we do. I was actually interested when I was doing a bit of research for this. I actually found this McKinsey thing, which I imagine probably most of you that are involved in supply chain probably already seen that there's actually even an increase in this is back in 2017, but an increase in I guess, computer-related impacts on supply chain, which are probably more related to global warming by the look of it, but all sorts of interesting things. So you've got your work cut out for you, I think. I mean, there's numerous things that can impact on what you're trying to do.
Darren, I don't know if you're aware, but you're not in presentation mode to us. We can see all your slides, but not presentation mode. Yeah.
We're in presentation mode here. Hang on, let me just try this. Is that in that? Yeah, let me just do the share again.
Okay.
Good idea. So that's in presentation mode. It actually blocks my screen, which is really annoying. Oh, hang on, that's it. That's better. That'll be better. How's that?
Fantastic.
Any better?
Yep.
Very good. Okay. Okay, so how does technology affect supply chain? Well, I mean, everyone would probably be reasonably aware that, you know, cybercrime in general is something that's now a massive business globally. It affects lots of businesses, lots of organizations, but can have a severe impact on supply chain. It's supply chain attack itself is a kind of a fairly broad term, but for the purposes of what I'm talking about here, I'm talking about somebody actually tampering with computer systems, ATMs, power systems, data networks, in order to try and install something that will disrupt your business in some way or bring some sort of harm. So, I mean, because generally speaking, supply chains attack don't necessarily have to involve technology. In 2010, there was actually burglars drilled a hole in the roof of a pharmaceutical company called Eli Lilly. Probably most people have heard of that. And they actually stole $80 million worth of prescription drugs. So that clearly was an impact on supply chain that didn't necessarily involve technology and would have had a significant impact. But what I'm going to talk about here is technology-based attacks. So one of the early ones, not surprisingly, was nation-state based. So in 2010, there was what believed to be a work between the Americans and the Israelis to disrupt the nuclear ambitions of Iran. And that was a thing called a worm called Stuxnet. Now, a worm is a piece of software that is put onto a system that you can't see, but is self-replicating. So as soon as it can see another computer, it will actually replicate itself onto another device. So that's what a worm is. So this worm was very specific in nature. It was designed to have an impact on the way the centrifuges worked in the uranium plant. So where they were trying to take uranium and make it turn it into a nuclear fuel, this particular worm gave false readings, and it actually caused physical damage to the centrifuges. So that's a very early example of how cyber attacks can affect the supply chain. This was a very deliberate one, nation state based, although no one's ever admitted to it, but it's quite strongly believed it was nation state based. As nation state based attacks are not uncommon. Some years ago, I was involved, in fact, very heavily involved in an investigation into a company called what was it called? Saudi Aramco, which is the largest oil producing. It's owned by the Saudi Arabian government. They had 10,000 computers were actually taken offline. The American government was very interested in that because they get obviously get most of their oil supplies from Saudi Arabia. That was another nation state. That was Iran, actually. That was believed to be Iran that actually got into their systems. And believe it or not, that attack came through Perth, which is actually how I got involved in that particular investigation. I guess in a non-nation state base, but a kind of the first, what I kind of perceive as the first modern example of a supply chain attack And this was in 2013, and this was on the US retailer Target. Many of you might, probably saw it in the news. It made the news worldwide. It was had quite a major impact. It resulted in the stealing of 40 million credit card and debit card details, as well as 70 million data files from Target. Now, the reason this is interesting, I think, for you in particular, is this is an example how it wasn't a direct attack on Target at all. It actually came in through a third party, and this is becoming increasingly common. So the attack was through a third party vendor called Fazio Mechanical Services. So Fazio Mechanical did air conditioning maintenance for Target stores across the US. They were compromised, and as part of that compromise, the attackers got into their network and they stole the credentials that allowed the maintenance people to remotely log into the Target stores. So even though that connection itself was actually quite secure when it was up and running, the fact that they had the credentials kind of made the fact that it was a secure connection completely irrelevant. So they got hold of those credentials, were then remotely logged into Target. They compromised the Target system, and then they then put some software onto their point of sale terminals and their cash registers, and it harvested credit card details as people did transactions. And say 40 million credit card details were stolen. They're very valuable on the dark web. So there's at any one time there's millions of credit card details for sale on the dark web, and even though they might only sell them for a couple of dollars each, they sell them in kind of job lots. They sell them millions at a time, and so it's quite a valuable harvest for those people. The other lesson from the Target attack is that the subsequent investigation, there was an investigation that followed once they discovered what had happened, and they shut their systems down. They kicked the bad guys out. There was sort of like and this is one of the things that evidence advisory does quite a bit of, what they call root cause analysis. How did it actually happen in the first place? As part of that, one of the things they discovered is that Target US nationally had a password policy. They had a policy about what password, how long passwords had to be, what characters they had to consist of, all that sort of thing. They had 547,000 internal network passwords. Of those, 472,000 were cracked within a week. So as part of the investigation, they were actually able to figure out what those passwords, 472,000 of those passwords were within a week, which means the passwords were very weak. And what it turned out was that people were, in fact, following the password policy. So although they had a policy about what passwords should look like, how they should be comprised, there was actually no audit. There's actually no audit at all of whether people were complying with that policy. And another interesting one was the compromise of ATMs that occurred and actually still go on. These are surprisingly not common. There was Tyro, who is a point of sale company. They had an issue some time ago where across Australia, all their point of sale terminals went offline due to an attack that was actually against their point of sale terminals. That caused them all sorts of grief. So they have some really weird names. So the ATM ones that have been around are called Suckful, Plotus, Tuyupkin, Green Dispense. Green Dispense is kind of an interesting one. But some of the other names are really weird. I don't know how they come up with the names for these things. Green Dispenser was one that affected ATMs in the US, where they displayed an out of service message, and when they did that, there was a way you could go into the attackers could go to the terminal, use some credentials, and actually make the drawer come open and they could actually take the money drawer would open up, and they could actually take the money out of the ATMs. And that's generally, some of these attacks do that. They find a way to actually pull money out of the ATMs, or they just take them offline. And that obviously can have a major impact. In March 2014, the token attack, that actually affected mainly Eastern Europe, about 50 or so ATMs in Eastern Europe. Probably not that well known here, but it was significant. If you're a nerd, it was significant in the way that it actually was implemented. I don't imagine anyone's really interested in the technical details, but it was like a lot of these things, a lot of these attacks, they increase in sophistication as time goes along, so they learn their lessons. This is a huge business globally, these sorts of attacks, and they learn lessons and they get more sophisticated and better at it every time they do it. A lot of ATMs actually have some version of Windows, usually a very old version of Windows, running in the background, and that actually makes them particularly vulnerable if the network that they're sitting on is not secure. So once you get to the machines themselves, they're quite vulnerable if you can actually get that far. Banks obviously have a lot of systems in place to prevent that, but if you can get that far into them, then it can really cause some significant issues. The SolarWinds attack is really probably well known, probably to many of you. This was a specific supply chain attack because through the SolarWinds attack, it allowed them to allowed the attackers to get into a piece of software that is used by organizations globally. So it allowed them to target SolarWinds is an IT infrastructure company. The attack on them was very subtle, and it was actually within their update mechanism. Somebody somehow managed to get into their systems, put a piece of malware in their update mechanism that then essentially used SolarWinds as the spreader to spread that malware around. So it affected about 18,000 SolarWinds customers. And then that, as I say, that then affected, even Microsoft themselves were affected by the SolarWinds attack. It actually, because they're a SolarWinds user, and they had to shut down quite a number of systems themselves in order to get rid of the problem. And essentially what they had to do was wipe the systems that were affected by it and start them from a non-clean build, because and then they had to then prevent updates, because the update mechanism within SolarWinds was the mechanism by which it was being spread around. What also happened with the SolarWinds one was the weakness that allowed the baddies to get in was rectified, but then only a couple of months later, they actually found another way in, and it happened again. And this is also not an unusual thing. We do find that if you're compromised by a cyber attack, they often leave behind another way to get in at a later date, which is why remediation has to be very carefully done, because you have to actually look to see whether or not anything's been left behind that allows a backdoor for them to come back later. It's very, very common for organizations. I think you remember there was a transport company here in Australia that was affected by a cyber attack. Then only about 3 months later, it happened again, and that was because they didn't remediate properly, and the baddies that had got in had left a mechanism to reinfect their system, and it happened again later, and that's very, very common. The SolarWinds this attack gained a lot of news worldwide, really because it was such a widespread. I mean, it just affected globally so many organizations that had to scramble. I don't know. I assume SolarWinds is around. A lot of companies go out of business when these things happen. A lot of businesses don't recover at all. Just simply because of the impact they can have. I don't expect you to actually read that diagram. That was just an example of how the multiple stages that can be gone through in order to effect an attack on somebody. One of the things to remember as well is some of the work that we do is with some of the large mining. I mean, we're in WA, we do a lot of work with large mining organizations. And what part of that work is actually looking at systems that appear to be working perfectly. What does happen is a lot of infiltration can be in there for weeks or even months before they actually launch an attack on either your business or a business that you're associated with. And it's the interconnectedness of businesses, and particularly for businesses that operate in the supply chain, you're very interconnected nowadays. That's the other one of the other reasons the SolarWinds attack was so significant, because this was totally unrelated to the businesses that were performing sort of supply chain activities, but they had a common software system that they used. And once one was compromised, many others were compromised. What we're seeing more and more in terms of attacks is using mobile devices as a mechanism to gain access to networks, particularly mobile phones. We're really seeing, I don't know whether anyone's familiar with the Pegasus attack. It's not really a supply chain one, but it's a really good example of how some of these attacks using mobile phones as the mechanism can go undetected for a really long period of time. So because people, what happens is often is people use their mobile phones, they connect to the business Wi-Fi when they're in their business. If the phone's compromised, that's actually a vector that allows an attacker then to get into the business network. As I say, it's really increasingly common to see, and mobile phones attacks which have not been seen, like the Pegasus one, hadn't been seen by anyone before. They're very difficult to detect, and I think we'll continue to see a significant increase in this type of vector to get into businesses now. We do a lot of work now for certain organizations when they travel overseas, when their executives travel overseas, they actually have their mobile phones checked by us when they come back into the country. And there was an example, I can't say who the company was, but there was a senior executive who was actually fired because he took his work phone with him to China, and when he came back, that phone had been compromised while he was there. He left it in his hotel safe, and actually the business said to him, "Did you ever leave it unattended?" And he said, "No." And then he said, "Oh no, actually I did. I left it in the hotel safe." And that was when they got in. So they actually physically got into the safe. So don't think these things don't happen, because they definitely do. And he was fired for that because he wasn't so actually supposed to take his work phone to China with him. A lot of companies don't allow that. So what can be done? So how do we prevent these things? It's really hard, almost impossible to 100% guarantee this will never happen to you, but you can certainly do a lot of things to make it as difficult as possible. And a bit like burglars, they'll go to the easiest target. If it's hard for them to get access, they'll move on to somewhere else where it is easy. I'll provide these slides so you can have a look at these. I don't expect you to be able to read them, but some really, I guess some of the things some stuff is not that complicated, but some of it's actually not really well followed, and we see that a lot. Particularly to do with your data. Where's your data stored? Who has access to it? It's actually, who of your providers has access to your data. It's really common now there to be common portals between businesses that work closely together. I was the CIO of a national stockbroking firm. We had direct connections to businesses, actually two-way connections to businesses that supplied things like stock market updates in real time, all that sort of thing. We carried out audits of their security and their policies and how they handled our data. And it's something really highly recommend. You need to know who has your data, who in that organization has access to that data, what policies they have in place, do they follow those policies? One of the really simple ones here is about patching, keeping everything, all your software up to date. It's almost a full-time job, I realize, but it is actually really important. In terms of preventing things like crypto locker type attacks, where they lock up all your, they encrypt all your data. Backups are really important. Backups that are offline are really important. Again, understanding what firewall rules, what antivirus software your suppliers have in place. Making sure that they properly follow. So if you have a supplier who has an employee that has access to that data, what do they do when that employee leaves? How do they, how promptly do they remove their access and lock them out? All those sorts of things which you might not necessarily think of off the top of your head, but can really be can leave the door open. There was I did an investigation here in WA not that long ago where a CIO left an organization that was fairly acrimonious. About 6 months later, the company, all their data was, they had an attack where all their data was encrypted on all their servers. I did what they call the root cause analysis. And that analysis, again, it's very technical, so I won't go into it, but that analysis showed that although they changed most of the passwords when the CIO left, because CIO had all the passwords to everything, they changed those passwords after he left, they actually missed one. And he actually hired someone on the dark net to perform the attack, and he gave them the username and password to get in, and that's actually how they got in. So it's so easy to miss unless you actually have it documented about what your process is going to be, and you follow that process. So if it does happen, what do? It's pretty hectic. We've been involved in incident response. Where it happens very quickly. It's very difficult to get on top of really fast. One of the things is, you may have to take your entire network offline for a short period of time just to prevent the spread. This stuff can spread very quickly, so immediately limiting access to all the data, isolating your network. One of the things I can't stress enough is have a plan. So a lot of businesses have, or they say they have like a disaster recovery plan, all those sorts of things. They often don't test them. They often actually don't check that they actually make sense and they work. Highly recommend that you do that. That you have a plan, have a communication plan, and actually test that it works and it makes sense, and it'll allow you to recover as quickly as possible. With mobile devices, if you think they're the source of compromise, they can be very subtle nowadays. A text to an executive, sometimes just answering the phone can actually cause something to be dropped onto the phone itself. We see it more and more. You get a phone call from some weird country you've never heard, you've never spoken to it, or you don't know anyone in. That's really common now for those to happen. They drop something onto your phone. we actually have access now to some software, which was the software that was used to discover the Pegasus attack. As the slide says, it was developed in Israel. A lot of this stuff is, they're very, very advanced in this sort of stuff. When I worked at the Federal Police, the National Telephone Interception System came from Israel. The mobile phone forensic tools all came from Israel. They're I don't know. I don't know whether it's their paranoia, but they're very advanced in developing this sort of stuff. So we have access to this technology that allows us to quickly detect on phones whether they've been compromised, even if that compromise has never been seen in the wild before. So what they call a zero-day compromise is something hasn't actually been seen previously. I hope that was useful. If in the future you'd like sort of anything in more technical, less technical, anything about the forensic space, I'm certainly happy to do that again. And I'm happy to take any questions you might have. Anyone?
Sorry, I was struggling with my IT, and now I'm back. I had all those screens open, and I was trying to desperately find where my video was and where my microphone was, and then now I got it. Fantastic. As people start with their questions, and we are open on the chat or Q&A to hear from them. I have some myself. You know, Darren, what you mentioned to us looks like sometimes a James Bond movie. How it goes, the implications, and I think that one of the things that I would like to ask is, there is this Hollywood thing that possibly those attacks come from that lonely person in a basement that is doing that just for fun, which is probably not exactly how it turns out to be today. So if you could talk a little bit more about who are these people that are doing that and how organized they are?
Yeah, that's a really good question. They are very organized. These sort of organizations that are doing this, they are kind of loosely affiliated groups. They even have specialties. So there are parts of there are groups of people who specialize in finding a way into a business, and then they actually then just sell that to somebody who's going to deploy the ransomware for money. These are big businesses. They make a lot of money out of what they do, and they're looking for new ways to do this all the time. It's not often just some geek sitting in a basement doing it for fun. It does happen, but in reality, these are very sophisticated groups of people that are doing this.
Okay, good. Thank you for that. And we have a question from Martin Lewis. Darren, are there any virus malware solutions for phones like we have for PCs?
Yes, there are. And again, they kind of vary very widely in cost and capability. So most of the common providers, Kaspersky and those sort of guys, those sort of organizations, Bitdefender, they all have mobile device type antivirus software. The only and they're good. The only downside is all of them will generally be looking for something that's already known. So they look for like a signature. Where they fall down is they won't usually detect something that's brand new. It hasn't been seen before. The only people we're aware of that can do that is a service called Zimperium. Again, an Israeli company. Okay, big surprise. That's like a subscription service that it's based on behavioral analytics. So it looks for anything occurring in your mobile phone that the system would not normally do. That's the only one I know of that will do that. But, for certainly 90% of the time, Bitdefender, Kaspersky, all those guys, Norton, they all have some sort of mobile antivirus that you can use.
Okay, thank you for that. So you mentioned that some of this software, they only work with things that you already know, and they are not able to actively detect new things. And then at some point in your presentation, you were talking about, those common portals that businesses have today, especially with integrated global logistics. How can you protect those portals if people, in a way, are coming in and out from different companies, different businesses all the time? So how difficult is that?
It's actually not too. It's not too bad. It has to be methodical. So, you have to do things like limit the authority. So, if somebody's coming in for an external organization, limit what they're actually allowed to do within your system. All the normal monitoring you'd have for like most businesses would have like antivirus, anti-spam type systems on their external facing network. So whatever it faces the internet, you need to do the same thing. And that's what certainly when I was at when I was the CIO, that's what we had. So even though they were allowed access, we still treated it as an unsafe external access. So we still monitored it for antivirus. With antivirus, we still monitored it for spam, all those sorts of things, and had very tight controls on what parts of our systems those external suppliers had access to. So it's a bit of a compromise between making sure they can do what they need to do, but also being secure. And it is possible. It's not what we do. We're going to be really clear. Doing that, I guess, proactive work, we work with organizations that do that. That's not what we do. We're helping remediate and fix it up when it all goes wrong, and also investigating where the attack came from, why it happened, and who carried it out. There's other organizations. We're great believers in you do what you're good at. So there are other organizations that do all that preventative work, set up your networks securely, all that sort of stuff. And we do work quite closely with a number of those, but it's not what we do.
And before we move to the next question, jumping on that, every now and then I hear people saying that, especially on the media, that the blockchain is the solution to all these security issues and everything, which I don't think is the case. So can you elaborate a little bit about it for our attendees?
Sure. Blockchain's a solution looking for a problem to solve. In certain circumstances, it will be quite useful. It won't prevent these types of attacks. What it's more related to is blockchain means that all the transactions leading up to the transaction you're doing are verifiable. So it has it's kind of self-verifying through, and that's why they're looking at, I know the ASX are looking at using it for share trading. So what that means is that it gives comfort that the shares that you're buying, you can actually see the provenance of them because it's securely kept in this blockchain that's immutable, that has the whole history of that share trading. I think they're looking at using it in things like real estate as well. So it's certainly not a panacea solution to everything. It does have some specific uses, but it's mainly to do with the verification of transaction.
Okay, good. Thank you for that. And we are back to Q&A with Martin again, and he's asking, hey, Darren, are there standards for IT defense that companies should use? Yes,
there definitely are. There's ISO 27001, I think is one of them. There's a lot of organizations measure themselves against the NIST standard, which is the National Institute for Standards and Technology. It's an American standards organization. So if you go to any of the cybersecurity businesses that do that sort of proactive work, they generally what they'll do first is they'll measure where you're at, and they'll do that against the NIST standard. That's very common. So there are a couple of standards around that at least give you a baseline measurement of where you're at, and then because you've got to security is always a compromise between I guess the risk appetite of the business and the amount of money you're willing to spend. So you can spend oodles of money protecting yourself, but you've got to I guess first you've got to understand what risks you're willing to accept and how much money you're willing to spend to mitigate those risks. Those sort of organizations can help you with that. And yes, so the NIST standard is generally the one that you be measured against.
Oh, good. You mentioned a couple of times about the importance of a disaster recovery plan. Just as an input, how it looks like, what should be in a disaster recovery plan so we can think about it and see if we have something that relates to that in our own companies?
Sure. So disaster recovery or a business continuity plan is really about if there's a major disruption to our business, how do we continue operating and how do we recover from the interruption? Now, one of the things that is very important in that process is the word business, because what tends to happen is organizations tend to entirely rely on IT to have that in place, but it's actually a business process generally owned by the board or senior management, and IT are a part of that. IT are often a very major part of that, but they're not all of it. So, for example, when I was at the stock trading firm, once a year we used to run a business continuity scenario. And that was conducted by myself. So all the senior department heads we would be in one room, and I would say, so we had major offices in Perth and Melbourne. I'd say, okay, the office in Melbourne's burnt to the ground. What are we going to do? And it's important that each part of the business understand how they're going to react, and you need to document this. How are they going to react to that scenario? How are they going to keep the business up and running? Obviously, IT is going to have a significant part of that. But in the early days when I used to do that, a department head would go, okay, well, we'll tell everyone to work from home and we'll get IT to deliver laptops to them. So it was like, well, okay, have you told IT that they need to have laptops somewhere that they need to deliver in case this happens? So even in their own minds, they had a thought about how it might work, but no one ever written it down. That's why it's so important to run scenarios, to actually write it down, walk through the process and make sure it's actually going to work. So we actually had, we had laptops and desktops in warehouses off-site that we actually could take to people and instantly get them up and running remotely. But you don't know to do that unless you actually run through the disaster scenario. And so it's, it's not, and it can be a myriad of different things. All our data has been encrypted. What do we do? How do we get back up and running? If you don't have a plan, though, it becomes really difficult to execute because no one knows what their role is.
Yep, that's definitely really important. And it's interesting to emphasize that it is a business plan that is not something that is done by IT and IT only, that it should involve all the strategic parts of the business, really, really relevant. Recently, this year, not in Australia, but in the US, we had a really good example of how a cyber attack can end up affecting the final customer with that Colonial pipeline ransomware attack, which for those that are not familiar with it, some hackers got into the system of this pipeline in Texas, and they went and distributed their malware, and they could paralyze their operation and influence their operation in such a way that people suddenly went running to gas stations because they are afraid that they would not get sufficient gas for their cars. And the interesting thing is that it affected other states that were not connected to that pipeline as well. So something that started as a cyber turned into a panic buying. So what are your thoughts on these connections of the digital and the real world nowadays?
Yeah, because I guess technology underpins so much of what we do. It can have, you know, ramifications. A problem with technology can have all sorts of ramifications, as you say, in the physical world. It's reasonably. I mean, the reason governments are taking this so seriously is in the future, you know, if you were to go to war with another country, supply chain attacks are going to be a really important mechanism by which, you know, another country can cripple a country that they're at war with, and it is because of the interconnectedness. I know, you know, things like power distribution, water distribution, those sort of utilities, they rely on a system called SCADA. People on the call may have heard of that. It was developed many years ago, and it was never designed to be secure. And it literally keeps people awake at night because it's not secure. They're trying desperately to sort of increase the security of it. But, you know, an attack on a SCADA system that, say, is for use for power distribution could cripple a nation really easily, simply because of that interconnectedness of them.
I remember reading and working with SCADA in the 1990s, so it has been a while. And well, another thing that comes to my mind, and that's pretty relevant when you think about cyber and supply chain, some people may or may not know that China is going through a really big enterprise, which is the Belt and Road Initiative. And it's their effort to build infrastructure and ports and train stations and railroads, connecting China to some Western countries in Africa and in Asia, even to Europe. And what people don't realize most of the time is that the Belt and Road Initiative is, of course, about tangible things like ports and railroads, but also about all the information system that connects those supply chains and all the flow of information, and then using a system that is proprietary to the Chinese government rather than from someone else. So all the implications that this may have, if you're doing business and say exporting from Australia, and you get your merchandise, your products through this Belt and Road Initiative, through this network, and suddenly you are in a way subject to your data being accessible to people that not necessarily you want to have access to your data. So that's something that's really on top of mind of supply chains nowadays.
Yeah, and that was one of the reasons that they wouldn't let Huawei do the 5G distribution systems, because they were very nervous about there being something built into them that allowed the Chinese to monitor traffic and all that sort of thing. So they're generally nervous. Governments are genuinely nervous about that sort of thing.
Yeah, definitely really relevant. And based on the discussion that we are having, say that I work for a company and I have awareness of the importance of cybersecurity, but I don't have the skills. I don't even have the basic knowledge to ask the right questions to you and your company. If I give you a call, I will not be able to go through, the most basic layers. Say that I want to learn a little bit more, so I kind of start understanding what are the implications and what are the questions that I have to ask to experts like you. How do I start my journey in this space?
Wow, that's an unexpected question. There's actually even there's TAFE courses, there's university courses. There's a very, very good organization called SANS, S-A-N-S, and they run, they're a not-for-profit organization, and they run lots of really good seminars and short training courses, some of them very introductory into cybersecurity and that sort of thing. and they're reasonably inexpensive as well. And they have really, really smart people that design those courses. So the Sands Institute is certainly a good place to, and they actually have on their, they actually have some very, very good white papers and discussion papers on their website as well, which are actually quite freely available. The other thing they have, which is really neat, is they have like posters. So like they have like a cybersecurity 101 posters, which gives you kind of a really good introduction of I guess where to start.
Fantastic. I just pasted the website to everyone on the chat so they can access it. Looks like a really interesting place to start. And I believe my final question today is, because we talked a lot about software and technology and systems. And once I heard that no system is safe from malice, from people from inside the company actually intending to do harm to the system. Can you talk to us a little bit about the people side of cyber?
Yeah. You can. It's there's no doubt that insider threat is a serious threat, and either on purpose or accidentally, people click on things they shouldn't click. In fact, when I was at the trading place, our worst client from an IT point of view was the CFO. He used to click on links all the time. But luckily the system was good, and the system because he used to put help desk requests in saying, I've received this invoice from an electricity company. I've clicked on the link and it won't open. And we used to say, well, do we have an account with that electricity company? You say, no, we don't. I say, well, why are you clicking on the link? So the system was actually smarter than him. And it did. So there are things you can do. And again, it depends. It's kind of like it's a balance between cost and the risk you're willing to accept. So you can get as sophisticated as behavioral analytics. So you can have systems that monitor all your users from essentially understand, and the system will understand their normal day, if for want of a better term. So what time they normally log in, what time they would normally log out, what types of activities that they normally undertake, and it'll actually detect something unusual. So if you've got an employee who never logs in at 3 o'clock in the morning and suddenly they do, the system would actually flag that as an alert, and in some cases it might even then prevent them from doing anything, that user from doing anything further, which may or may not be inconvenient. So there are certainly systems you can put in place to mitigate use. If you're an organization that has a lot of intellectual property, so a lot of law firms do this. We certainly used to do this at Patterson's. It monitors attachments that employees send externally, and it monitors them for it might look inside the attachment to make sure that there's no intellectual property that belongs to the organization that's going out, customer list, client list, whatever that might be. So again, the level of sophistication can be from quite basic to very sophisticated, and the organization has to make an assessment about what risk they're willing to accept. But you can certainly put things in place. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, definitely. And every and each one of us should improve our skills on digital literacy and to identify at least the most basic kind of scams and attacks that come. I remember in a previous company, there's one time when I got an email, very short one from my CAO saying, come to my office now. And then I'm moving. And then when I get to the stairs, I see other people coming in the same direction. And then we look at each other, well, that must be something really important because everyone is being called to go to that place right now. And then in the middle of the stairs, the IT guy comes and say, wait, stop everyone. That's not the case. He didn't send you that message. We were in a way, someone played a trick to us coming through our systems and all. So it was harmless at that point, but shows that we were vulnerable. And the next thing that we had was a seminar to help us understand when an email was legitimate and how to identify things that were coming from other sources. So short story about how it can happen kind of to each and every one of us.
Absolutely. Actually, one of the things I did mean to mention is phishing, which is the sending you an email trying to get someone to click on a link, is still the most common way that access is gained to a system. So educating your users, some basic skills on recognizing whether an email is legitimate or not is absolutely worth the while.
Fantastic. Darren, I don't think we have any other questions at the moment, so I'd like to thank you. Thank you so much for this insightful presentation, and to share your information and your contact to us should we need to revise, rethink, reassess our cyberspace. Knowing that this is something that will continue with us for our entire life, because there is no life nowadays that is not digital. It might have been the case 50 years ago, but from this point on, everything and everyone is digital, more and more digital. So thank you very much for your presentation and your insights today.
No problem at all. A real pleasure. Anytime, if I can present on anything else you're interested in, I'm happy to do that.
And to those attending today, if you want to continue the conversation, contact Darren or contact ASCI, and we will be happy to move on to your questions and to discuss it a little bit more. Okay, so thank you all. Thank you so much. And with that, we come to an end to our webinar today. Have a good day.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.